Thanks so much, Silver. For everyone watching, we're going to do this a little bit differently. I want to be a little more interactive. And do me the favor, I want you to go to pollev.com/bethegood. You'll see the link there on the screen. All lowercase, no spaces. We're going to have a lot of interactivity during the session. And this way we'll be able to interact directly together. So pollev.com/bethegood. Or if you want to do it on your phone, you can text the phrase "be the good" to the number 22333. Go ahead and do that. Or if you're fancy, I guess you can go ahead and scan the QR code and we'll go ahead and get started there. I have a question there waiting for you. So I'm going to hold for about 45 seconds to let everyone go to pollev.com/bethegood. Or you can text the phrase "be the good" to the number 22333. All right. Some people are already logging in there. Fantastic. Let's see how people are doing with that one. All right, first question is pretty simple. How are you feeling about today's session? And looks like we're seeing hopeful, we're seeing curious. Fantastic. Go ahead and get in there. Second question in there is how many diversity, equity, inclusion, or bias sessions have you been to? 100% of people so far, too many to count. I'm going to go ahead and put that up there again, pollev.com/bethegood, or you can text the phrase "be the good" to the number 22333. It'll ask you to enter in a username. You don't have to. You can just skip over that. I really don't care about who you are because it's all anonymous. We're going to be asking some pretty deep questions, and I want to make sure you have that layer of anonymity at your disposal. So go ahead and log in there, pollev.com/bethegood. I'm going to go ahead and hold and let some more people join in for about 1 more minute. All right, pollev.com/bethegood. Fantastic. I'm seeing people who are inspired. People are excited. People are curious. People are hopeful. Fantastic. The sessions today have been absolutely fantastic, and I hope to build on top of those to make sure that we have a pretty powerful hour plus together. All right, I'll give about 30 more seconds. Excellent. A lot of people are going in there. Fantastic. Just go ahead and flip over, see how people are thinking. Feeling curious, inspired, uplifted, excited. A lot of people excited. Great, good, interested, hopeful. I love it. Fantastic. Some people, this is my first session on diversity, equity, inclusion, bias, etc. No worries there. You might be ruined forever, but that's okay. More people feeling good about this. Fantastic. Okay. If you're entering those in, keep entering them in. I want to go ahead and get started here. Albert Einstein once said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." Now, this is often misquoted as Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. He never said that. He said this. And what it means is that as adults, as humans, we have this natural tendency to develop patterns of behaviors and habits. And then sometimes we get ourselves into trouble. And then to get out of trouble, we employ the same patterns of behaviors and the same habits, which makes no sense. And so if we want different outcomes, then the process needs to be different. And so I want this session to produce different outcomes for you. For many of us, we've gone through so many diversity sessions that we can't even count them anymore. And we usually get the same results. There's a colleague of mine out of Harvard, Frank Dobbins, and he said, most diversity training fails. And he's been studying this for the last 30 years. And there's a predictable reason this happens because we're doing the same things over and over again. And so I wanted to have a different kind of conversation about race, racism, discrimination, bias, privilege, all of this. And I'm not going to do it in the usual way. In fact, to prove that I'm not doing it in the usual way, I actually want to start with an exercise in third grade thinking. So if you're back to being in third grade, that's when we all kind of learn how to sit around a circle and read a book out loud together. So I'm going to put a phrase on the screen. And what I want you to do, wherever you are, whatever space you are, feel free to mumble to yourself or read it out loud if you're bold, is I'd like you to read the phrase out loud. Right, just to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and read what you see on the screen now. Don't worry about the captions or the copyright. All right, so I'll read it. Feel free to read along with me. 1, 2, 3, read the phrase. Just like good third graders, right? Ready? 1, 2, 3, read the phrase. I'm going to pretend that you did that perfectly. Okay, here comes the phrase. 1, 2, 3. Fear of being a failure is one of the most effective forms of freezing innovation. Another is fear of being successful. It's pretty deep, but totally not the point. Congratulations, you've now graduated third grade, and we're going to start moving into fourth grade and working with some numbers. So in just a moment, I'm going to put the same phrase back on the screen. And what I want you to do is, fourth graders, I want you to simply count the number of F's, the letter F, that appears in that phrase. Now, this orange dot here, this is a countdown timer. You will see that disappearing as time goes by. I'm going to give you 15 seconds to accomplish the task. All right. Once that 15 seconds expires, the phrase will disappear, and then we'll move forward asking some more questions in the poll everywhere. All right. 15 seconds on the clock. Fourth graders, get ready to count the F's. Your time begins now. And there's time. Okay, what I want to know in the poll everywhere, it's just opened up for you. I want to know two things. Question number one, how many F's are in the phrase? Somewhere between 4 and 13. And then I want you to tell me, what is your level of confidence that you have the right answer on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being certain and 0 meaning I've got no clue. All right, so go ahead and let me know how many F's are in the phrase and what is your level of confidence in your answer. You'll see that there in the poll everywhere. And there's a slight delay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause for a little bit. If you're watching this back later, just know that we're engaging live here. If you want to write down your answers, go ahead and grab a piece of paper and a pencil and write down your answers and see how you do compared to everybody else. I'm going to go ahead and hold here for about 20 more seconds. I see about 10 people are already into it, so go ahead. If you haven't yet gone into it and logged in, we're doing all of our interaction at pollev.com/bethegood. That's all lowercases, no spaces. Or you can text the phrase be the good to the numbers 22333 and they'll send you a link directly to it. All right. Let's see how people are doing with this one. All right. Looks like there are people who think that there are 4 F's, 7 F's, 8 F's, 9 F's, 10 F's, 11 F's, and 12 F's. All right, so I think we have to go back to third grade here because this is just 2 sentences, fourth graders. All right, now let's look at our level of confidence. And it looks like, much skewed to the north. Very high confidence. Vast majority of people, 8, 9, or 10 confident, right? Very high confidence. And yet the numbers are all over the place. Obviously, 8 is the clear favorite, and then followed by 12, 11, 10, 9, 7, and poor 4 is in last place. All right, well, as it turns out, there are 12 F's. 12 F's. What? All right, so what you're experiencing right now is the space between your feeling and sensation of certainty and the reality of newly presented information. This space is what I call the oh crap gap. Now, I call it the oh crap gap because that's what your brain feels when it projects this idea of certainty and then you realize, oh crap, maybe I don't know. Now, if you think that we're lying, the couple people that got it correct and me, let's look and see where they are. Here's our phrase, and we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, then 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. All right, I think most everyone got those. And then we have 9, 10, 11, and 12. The ofs. What? The of. All right, so what's going on? Before I explain this, I want to introduce you to a very large number. That's 11,201,000 bits. Now, a bit is the basic form of computer information. It comes from the phrase binary digit. So binary digit swishes down to the word bit. Right now, the bits are the ones and zeros of computer language. Now, as it turns out, our eyes or our visual system take in the equivalent of a 10 million bits of information every single second. That's like lights and darks and colors and depth and focus and all that information, right? Our skin, our sense of touch, take in another 1 million bits of information. Our ears and our noses take in another 200,000 bits of information. And then finally, our sense of taste, or taste buds, take in another 1,000 bits of information. So all told, our brains, through our perceptions, are taking in the equivalent of 11,201,000 bits of information every single second. But the interesting thing is that the maximum amount of information that our brains can consciously process is only 50 bits of information. Only 50, which means that almost all of our processing, or 99.99995% of our processing, is unconscious. And so to help make sense of the world around us, or to expedite our cognition, our brains take shortcuts and they jump to conclusions. In psychology, we call these heuristics. Now, heuristics are defined as an experience-based strategy for solving problems or making decisions that often provide an efficient means of finding an answer, but cannot guarantee a correct outcome. And so the shortcut or heuristics that your brain took in this situation was fear. That's an F. Failure. That's an F. Of. That's a V. And your brain processed 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of the F's in of as V's, because you weren't actually counting the shape of the letter F. You were counting the F sound, which is more efficient. Now, I teach what are called the principles of human understanding. Essentially, these are 22 principles that are the brain science and psychology behind leadership, communication, collaboration, and relationships. Now, whenever I say relationships, people are like, ooh, you're talking about romantic relationships. And yes, it can be applied in that arena. But I'm talking about anytime two humans are relating, that's a relationship. If you understand these principles, you can understand a lot of the problems in our communication. You can be a better human. Now, we don't have time to go through all 22 of the principles, obviously, but I do want to hit a few of them. And the first one is called the illusion of certainty. So if you remember, if you look at how confident you were in your answer, I think it was about 2/3 of people were 8 or higher in confidence. Everyone is at least half or greater in confidence. And yet only 1 or 2 people actually got it right. That is the illusion of certainty. Our brains like to project certainty, even if there is none. Even if there is none. Think about this. You ask someone, hey, when are you going to turn in that report or finish that paper? And they say, a week from Tuesday. And then they fail to meet their own self-imposed deadline. That's the illusion of certainty. Now, I start with this because you may come to a session like this and say, I know what to expect. I've been to so many diversity sessions before. I know that virtual is less effective. I know what you're going to say. I know your type. Well, maybe that's the illusion of certainty, because the illusion of certainty makes us say things like, I know. And I want to remind you that maybe you don't. Now, I'm not saying you're always wrong, because that's not true, but I am saying you are not always right. And if I want you to think about this, 100% of your life has been lived through your own perceptions, through your own experience. And so far, you've been successful. I mean, you've made it to this point. You've been successful. And what happens with our brains in this illusion of certainty, we start to see our past experience as a very, very credible predictor of our future experiences. Now, what happens if the world keeps presenting itself in the same way? No problems, right? We are validated in our experiences, in our expectations. But if we run into somebody who's had a different experience than we have, and they're expecting or predicting a different world than you are, what happens? And it's important to understand that the only things in life we can learn are things that we don't yet know. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. The only things in life we can learn are things that we don't yet know. And if the illusion of certainty has its way, we know everything already, which means we can't learn anything. Okay. Now I can introduce myself. My name is Eric Bailey. I'm the president of a firm called Bailey Strategic Innovation Group. We do communication consulting, and I have a passion for facilitating meaningful dialogue for a lot of different reasons. But I want to tell you one personal reason. A couple of years ago, my family and I, we were walking down the streets of Las Vegas. We were going to go to the Excalibur show, and I had my daughter on my shoulders, and I was holding my middle son's hand, and immediately behind us, my wife was holding our oldest son's hand. He was 12 at the time. And as we're walking down the sidewalk, totally unprovoked, this woman comes, like, instead of like walking past us on the sidewalk, she kind of walks at us. And she just starts staring at us as she's kind of walking at us. And she says, "Move, you effing ends!" And she screams at us, and she's spitting as she talks, and she has venom coming out of her eyes. And when she gets that last word, she's basically face to face with my son, who was directly behind me. Now, this wasn't the first time he'd been called that word. And so he understood what that word meant. He understood where it came from. And he broke down right there in the middle of the sidewalk, crying. Now, I tell that story because that is an experience that I've had, that he has had. And there's nothing, I've looked in the parenting handbook on how do you handle a situation where your child, your oldest child, has just been verbally assaulted by a random adult stranger on a public street. How do you handle that situation? Do you immediately comfort them? Do you go address it with that person? I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to comfort him because he was deeply wounded. Now, the interesting thing is that just a few moments later, probably about 15 minutes later, we end up turning around and kind of walking back in the other direction. My daughter, she hurt her ankle, or her knees were hurting from walking too far. And immediately my son took her on a piggyback ride, which isn't something that he normally does. And we asked him later that night, and he said, Jaron, why did you do that? And he said, I wanted to protect her in case something else happened. He wanted to be there to protect her. And what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing for someone to do. Right. Now, this next picture you'll see with me and my son there together. You see our shirt say Black Lives Matter. But if you look closer, it says I Matter. My wife and I, we actually organized a march, Kids Walk for a Change, for a change, to help parents and children to talk about discrimination and racism in a way that they haven't been able to before, and giving them ideas and tools to engage in this dialogue. And my son said he wanted to get up on stage and tell his story. And also my other kids wanted to tell their stories too. But my son got up there and he told a story about being called the N-word 4 times. Twice at school. The first time, maybe the kids didn't know, so we educated the children and the parents and the administrators. Well, the second time, they definitely knew, right? The third time actually happened on a public street. We're on a bike ride. It was me, my son, and my wife on a bike ride. A same exact phrase, you effing ends. Someone just randomly jumped out and screamed that at us, right? And the fourth time was there in Las Vegas. And he got up and he told his story. He told the story. At the moment this photo was taken, he actually had kind of lost his nerve. The emotion kind of washed over him, and he forgot what he was going to say. He actually ran off the stage, and he gave me the microphone, and I embraced him and I said, you can do this. And so we went up and he told his story. And it's interesting because that is something that most people don't have to experience. And what happens when you run into somebody who's had a different experience than you have. Right? Now, what we were dealing with there is called racism. We all kind of understand about racism. Racism is defined as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, right? Now, that's more on the acute side of racism. We're going to kind of dive deeper with this idea as we go, because it's important. There's very important distinctions that we need to draw. Now, one of the things I've been doing a lot is been spending time talking about how do we engage in conversation better. And so my vision is we're going to change the way the world communicates. There's a fundamental problem happening in our world is we are losing the ability to communicate with each other. We're getting more defensive. We're getting more attacking, and we're villainizing each other left and right. In fact, this thing happens all the time on Facebook. Eli was talking earlier about social media, right? This thing called the unfriend, right? People are unfriending each other left and right. And this happens because usually two people disagree about something, usually politics. And because of that disagreement, we say it's no longer worth my time or energy to acknowledge you exist. I don't want to see your kids' pictures anymore, right? Now, what happens if we keep separating from people that disagree with us over and over? And they're doing the same thing too, right? Oh, eventually we'll end up surrounded by people who think like we think and know what we know. And if we're only surrounded by people who know what we know, and the only things in life we can learn are things we don't yet know, we stop learning. We stop growing. In fact, this phenomenon is happening so often that unfriend is now a word in the Oxford English Dictionary. That's a problem. That's a problem. And I think that if we understand how to communicate with each other when we disagree, not if, but when we disagree, we can fundamentally change our society. Now, just some quick notes about today. I want to talk really quickly about what today is and what today is not. Today is not about judging your personal politics. It's not about labeling you as right or wrong. It's not about telling anyone that they're a racist. It's not about taking sides. It's not about invalidating anyone's opinion or experience. Today is about gaining some common language and some underlying challenges and some assumptions. Challenge these sorts of things, right? Create the safe place for some productive dialogue. Create this launching point for an ongoing culture journey. This is not going to be an ending point for you. I want you to take this and talk with people in your sphere of influence, people at your organization, people in your family, people that you talk with, your friends, your family, your neighbors. All right. I want you to develop some practical tools to handle difficult communication situations. All right. So the next exercise we're going to do here on the poll everywhere is we're going to play the dice game. Now, what's going to happen here is I'm going to launch a couple of polls here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one die at a time. So we have here the purple die, the green die, and the yellow die. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll each die 10 times. And so you'll see in your poll here launched, available now, you will see the purple die launching game or rolling game. So what I want you to do is I want you to predict what the result of each roll is going to be. Don't go through all of them right now. I'll roll it and then you guess. I'll roll and then you guess for the next one. All right. So let's go ahead and see how people are guessing. What do you think roll number one is going to look like? All right. Let's see. Roll number one for purple. What do you predict? All right. Fantastic. Go ahead and do one at a time. One roll at a time. All right. Fantastic. Decent distribution here. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and roll the purple die for the first roll. Let's see, and let's go ahead and give it a stop here. It's a 2. It's a 2. All right, now go ahead and go to that second one. What do you think roll number 2 is going to turn out to be? Go ahead and roll number 2. Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. Roll number 2. Let's go ahead and see. Roll number 2 is a 4. Number 2 is a 4. All right. Roll number 3. Go ahead and predict roll number 3. Perfect. All right. Roll number 3 is a 3. Roll number 3 is a 3. Fantastic. Fantastic. Roll number 4. Roll number 4 is a 6. All right. Let's go roll number 5. Roll number 5 is a 2. Roll number 5 is a 2. Fantastic. Roll number 6 is a 2 also. Fantastic. Roll number 7 is a 2. All right, I got 3 2s in a row. Look at that, lucky if you're guessing number 2. Number 8 is a 5. All right. Roll number 9 is a 4. And last roll for purple is a 2. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the green die. The green die. So feel free to see people kind of going ahead and guessing ahead. That's totally fine. Go ahead and guess ahead. If you want to change your responses, you can change your responses. Just don't hit submit. But don't go back and change it to whatever it was. I just want to kind of see how people think about these sorts of things. All right. Let's go ahead and see how people are doing with the green die. Rolling the green die. Roll number 1 is a 6. Roll number 2 for green. Green roll number 2 is a 6. All right. Green number 3 is a 6. That's 3 in a row. Roll number 4 for green is a 6. Another 6. Roll number 5. A 6. It's 5 in a row. What are the chances? Roll number 6 is a 6. Interesting. Roll number 7. Keep guessing ahead of me if you can. It's a 6. Roll number 8 is also a 6. Roll number 9 is a 6. And final roll for green is a 6. Interesting. All right, so we have a lot of rolls for green that were 6. Every single one was a 6. So my question to you is, as we kept going through these green rolls, did you notice your expectation of what it was going to be change? And if we start to look, we'd start to see more and more people predicting that it was going to be a 6 as we go. And that is what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about how, let's see if I can get this to show up for you. There it is. So we see that at the beginning, no one guessed a 6. On roll 2, nobody guessed a 6. By roll number 3, one person. Then by roll 4, a majority of people guessed 6, and then most people guessed 6, and then from there it never waned, right? Some people kind of guessed around, but we noticed that there was actually a change in guessing behavior based on what we saw on the screen. And what I want to talk with you about is this idea of bias. Now, I want to throw this caution tape up here, because bias is one of these phrases that can really fundamentally change the way we engage with the world around us, right? And people actually will change how they feel about what you're talking about just because of this word. I ask people all the time, what is bias? What is bias? People will tell me, most often I hear bias equals racism and sexism and ageism and homophobia and all of the isms, right? And those are bad things, and I'm a good person. So people will say to me, I don't have bias. Well, if that's you, that's what you're thinking, that's what you're saying, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, I do. We all have bias. And we'll talk about what that means in just a moment. The second thing I hear from people is they say, okay, I understand I have bias, but bias is bad. How do we stop it? How do we stop bias? We don't stop bias. We don't stop bias because bias is not bad necessarily. Bias is actually a psychology term that is defined as a strong preconceived notion about someone or something based on information that we have, perceive to have, or that we lack. Now, these preconceptions are mental shortcuts, does it sound familiar? Right, that the human brain produces to expedite information processing, to quickly help it make sense of what it is seeing. Bias is a tool that the brain uses because there's too much information coming in, so it has to create shortcuts to make sense of the world. Okay? And so the interesting thing is how we start to develop these biases is based on information that we have, perceive to have, or that we lack. Right? Now, said another way, bias is essentially a preference to accelerate cognitive processing time. So I want to help illustrate this. Go ahead and grab a pen or a pencil. Right? You should have a pen or a pencil handy from where you're sitting. Everyone go ahead and grab a pen or a pencil. I'm actually going to pause for 20 seconds and let everyone go ahead and grab a pen or a pencil. All right. I haven't frozen. I'm just pausing for another 10 seconds. Now, if you ever, just a little peek behind the curtain, if you ever do any virtual facilitation or virtual speaking, if you need someone to go get some tool to participate or interact, but you keep talking, oftentimes people will not want to leave the session to go get whatever tools because they don't want to miss whatever you're saying. And so that barrier to what they call fear of missing out, or FOMO, right? They will actually not participate. They'll risk not participating because they don't want to miss something that you're saying. And so if you want them to go, if they need to go get something, just pause talking, just kind of stare at the camera for 20, 30 seconds, which is awkward enough that if they don't have the tools, they'll want to go get them. And then they'll go and participate later or with you. And then you can go and explain it like I just didn't give them an extra 30 seconds to come back. All right, so grab a pen or a pencil. What I want you to do with that, I want you to go ahead and sign your name. So go ahead and sign your name on your pen or with your pen or pencil on your piece of paper or envelope or whatever you decide, iPad or something like that. Go ahead and sign your name. All right. And I've got a poll open there for you. I want to know, what hand did you choose to sign with? Very intentional question there. What hand did you choose to sign with? Did you choose to sign with your left hand, Did you choose to sign with your right hand, or did you say, Eric, I didn't, it wasn't a choice, I just signed my name? Go ahead and let me know in the polls, what hand did you choose to sign with? And if you haven't yet logged in, please go ahead and do so. You can log in at pollev.com/bethegood, or you can text be the good to the number 22333, and all these polls will pop up for you automatically. All right. Now, as we go through, it's really interesting because a lot of people will say, I didn't choose. I didn't choose. I just picked it up and signed. Well, here's the interesting thing. I argue that you did choose. And you did choose because, for most of us, we chose our dominant hand. If you had two hands available, or your mouth or your neck, you could have signed with something else, but you chose, without consciously thinking, to sign with your dominant hand. You actually leveraged bias. You had a preference to accelerate your cognitive processing time. It's easier for you to sign your name with your dominant hand because you've practiced since you were a kid. Right? Now, here's the thing. It is possible to choose behaviors outside of your bias. You could have chosen something different. Now, to prove that, go ahead, switch hands. Go ahead and switch hands to your non-dominant hand and sign your name again, if you're able to, or put your pen in your mouth or something. Sign with something other than your dominant hand. This is the point in the exercise where people start to hate me. If you hate me, I'm sorry, not sorry. No, the point is you can do it. You can sign your name with your non-dominant hand. You can choose behaviors outside of your bias. It's just uncomfortable. It's awkward, and you likely don't have the results that you're used to, right? Maybe it was slower, maybe it's sloppier, and maybe it's neater for some people, right? But that's the thing. Operating and intentionally choosing behaviors outside of your biases is possible. It's just not usual. Now, the funny thing is, we start talking about bias, a lot of times people think it's only just a mental thing. Well, it does live in the brain, but it's not just kind of a mental thing. It's actually, there's some neuroscience to bias. I'm gonna give you a little neuroscience lesson here, but the cells inside of our brain are called a special kind of animal cell called neurons. And they're a special kind of cell because they're able to pass electricity from one to the other. Now, the point at which two neurons connect, it's called the synapse. And that's where electricity flows from one neuron to the next. Now, the interesting thing is that as electricity flows from one neuron to the next and crosses over that synapse actually gets stronger. And so it becomes easier for electricity to flow along that synapse the next time. And so the more electricity that flows from one neuron to the next over a synapse, the easier it is for electricity to flow from one neuron to the next across that synapse. Now, the funny thing is that the neurons and synapses responsible for the motor function of signing your name with your dominant hand are very well practiced, right? The synapses are very strong. And so you don't have to think about it. It's automatic. Now, all of the neurons and synapses responsible for signing your name with your non-dominant hand are all there. They're just not as well practiced. And so this idea of bias is actually an efficiency, an energy efficiency tool that the brain uses to accelerate our cognitive processing time. Now, I want to introduce you to a couple of biases that you probably experience a lot, but probably don't have words for. One of them is called Apophenia Bias. Now, Apophenia Bias is this human preference to identify patterns in seemingly random data. So let's say that you go to 100 meetings at work over the course of a year. And that may be a low number for some of you, right? But let's say you are 95% of the time, you're on time or early to the meeting. I would say you're an on-time person, right? Well, 5 of those 100 meetings, you just happen to show up late because some external factors, someone was in your office or the elevator broke down, or I don't know, something happened. Someone stopped you on the way, your car broke down, you were at another meeting somewhere else, off location, whatever. Something happened 5 times over the course of a year. I would still say you're an on-time person. But as it turns out, those 5 meetings, those random 5 meetings spread across the year, happen to be the only 5 meetings that you were in with someone named Greg, right? Your coworker named Greg. So for Greg, his entire sample size, 5 meetings spread across the year, the only meetings he has with you, 100% of the meetings he has with you, you are late. So using apophenia bias, creating a pattern from this random data, Greg is going to assume that you are a late person. You always show up late to meetings. That's apophenia bias. Now, another thing we like to do is we like to identify patterns in inanimate objects. We will see faces everywhere. We look at this and we say, oh, that's clearly a face. Oh, that obviously they made that to look like a face. Oh, come on, that's a face. Definitely that's a face, right? And so we see these and we see faces. We are creating patterns in the seemingly random data. That's apophenia bias. And we do this all the time. So speaking of patterns and data, I want to ask you another, and the questions are going to get progressively harder. This is going to be an interesting one. I would like you to let me know, what one-word stereotypes do you think are most common in the United States about Black males and about millennials? All right, so open that up in the poll. Think about this one for a little bit. What one-word stereotypes do you believe are, now just to be clear, I'm not saying what are your stereotypes, and I'm not saying, I'm not asking you to divulge your personal stereotypes. I'm saying, knowing what you know about the world you've lived in, if you live in the United States, what one word do you think is most common about Black males and about millennials? First, you're going to enter in the one word. Make sure it's one word because we're going to do word cloud here about Black males, and then hit next, and you can do the one word about millennials. Okay. All right. So far, we have unemployed, criminal, angry, violent, thug, dangerous, athletic, aggressive, entitled. So far, one-word stereotypes for Black males. For millennials, what we have so far, we have lazy and entitled. Go ahead and keep typing those in. You'll see this adjust as you type those in. See, conservationist, intimidating. Yes, athletic, criminal, kind of raising up to be the most common one. And for millennials, let's see how people are doing. Entitled, selfish, demanding, lazy. Yes, absolutely. Now, I've asked this question now to probably 25,000 people across the country, and we see the same thing showing up over and over and over again, right? We see the top three answers for Black males. We see criminal, we see angry, we see dangerous, we see athletic, right? We see violent, we see thug, right? For millennials, we see lazy, we see entitled, we see selfish, we see snowflake, all these common words to see. Now, I just want to pause, and I want you to be empathetic for just a moment. Put on your millennial hat and your millennial backpack. And I want you to imagine in your millennial backpack as you walk around this world, there's a post, a pole sticking out of the top of it. And at the top of that pole, there is a billboard with all of these words on it: entitled, lazy, self-absorbed, demanding, selfish, whiny, indulgent. Now, we teach people all the time, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, right? We teach that to our kids, to people. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. Well, what if before you had a chance to intentionally do anything to make that first impression, people looked at you based on your age and said, oh, they are lazy and entitled and selfish and self-absorbed and whiny, right? What if that was, what would you have to do? You would have to overcome those ideas about yourself, right? People are recognizing patterns. And so whatever patterns have manifest for them, right? They slowly will start to see you as that just because you belong to that group, right? If you're a Black male, what if before you had a chance to do anything intentionally, to create a strong first impression, people looked at you and saw you are criminal, you are angry, you are athletic, you are dangerous, you're aggressive, you're a thug, you're violent? What would that be like? You would have to do a lot of work to intentionally prove that you are not. And how do you prove that you're not a criminal? How do you prove that you're not aggressive? Right? Think about that. What would you have to do that? And that's something that we want to be thinking about, right? This idea of patterns, right? There's so many patterns that we see. We're going to come back to this in a moment. Before we do, I want to talk about my friend, the librarian. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to imagine my friend the librarian. Now, my friend the librarian, I'm going to describe them, and I want you to kind of build a mental image. My friend the librarian is about 5'9" tall, has blonde hair, usually kind of pulled back into a kind of bun kind of thing. My friend the librarian always wears glasses, has green eyes, always wears brown Doc Marten shoes, khaki pants, green library polo with the library book logo on the front there. My friend the librarian, his name is Stephen. Now, when I got to that last fact, his name is Stephen. Did that change or alter your image of my friend the librarian? For most of us, it does, because what happens is we have something called availability bias. Now, availability bias is a mental shortcut that relies on whatever information in our memories is most readily available to be drawn upon. And so think about this. For most of us, our entire lives, our memory of a librarian is a female person. And so when we start to think about a librarian, we actually start with this idea that this must be a female person. And then we say, okay, everything else just validates that that's true, right? The glasses, the hair, the bun, the height, all of this, it reinforces that's availability bias. Now, what happens if our patterns become our availability bias? Our apophenia, our desire to create patterns, start to become what we expect to see in the world. Let's go back to our ideas of what happened when we rolled the dice, right? When the dice showed continually that it was random, you'd see the distribution of responses, or the guesses were random. And then eventually we saw on our screens that the green die continually showed 6. It was 6. It kept showing 6. It was reinforced that it was 6. And you saw the guesses, the predictions of what was going to happen skew. All of a sudden, we started to recognize patterns. And all of a sudden, our ideas, our expectations, our predictions changed. And this is what happens when a society has decided that this is the pattern. All of a sudden, it changes what we expect to see going forward. Now, I want to move into another principle here called perception versus reality. And this one's really interesting. One of my favorite principles here is called perception equals reality, right? Here's the thing. It's not true. Perception does not equal reality. If you don't believe me, let's look at the dictionary definitions. Perception is defined as a way of understanding or interpreting something, and reality is defined as a state of things as they actually exist rather than as they may be perceived or might be imagined. I'm going to say that again. Rather than as they may be perceived. So in the definition of reality, it says not perception. But then we say all the time, okay, hold on. My perception is my reality. What does that mean? That means that my perception is the way I believe it to be. My perception is my truth, or my perception is my worldview. Now, worldview is a really, really important phrase here. Worldview is defined as a set of assumptions held by an individual or a society about physical or societal realities, right? So it's our interpretations of the way things physically are or the way society should operate. It affects our practical attitudes and behaviors as well as theoretical and philosophical commitments. So as we started to generate this worldview that the green die is going to be 6, predictably, reliably, we started to adjust our expectations. Our worldview shifted. This is what happens with our attitudes about Black males, about Asian drivers, about females in the workplace. This is what happens. We start to see evidence and reinforce these patterns over and over and over again. And they're actually predictable if you understand psychology. Now, here's something really interesting about our perceptions in the world. All right. So sometimes we perceive things differently. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to tell me, what colors do you see in this shoe? Is this shoe a pink and white shoe, or is this shoe a gray and teal shoe? All right, it's opened up in the polls. Let me know, what colors do you see in this shoe? Is this shoe a pink and white shoe, or is this shoe a gray and teal shoe? Now, this is one of my favorite ones. This would be reminiscent of the dress of 2015, right? Where people see it different things. It breaks the internet. But I want to ask you, what colors do you see in the shoe? Do you see a pink and white shoe, or do you see a gray and teal shoe? All right, let's start looking at the responses here. And I really don't like this one because I am in the vast minority here, but it looks like an overwhelming majority of people see this as a gray and teal shoe. Another pink and white person joined our team. I see this as a pink and white shoe, and I hate that most people do not see this as a pink and white shoe. But interesting that we perceive things differently, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. As it turns out, when we perceive things differently than other people, whether it's visually or experientially, our first reaction is to say, how could you possibly, right? So knowing that 83% of the people involved in this see the shoe as gray and teal, or 85 now, see this shoe as gray and teal, right? I'm saying, how could you possibly see this as gray? It's obviously that this shoe is clearly pink and white, right? There's pink here and there's white here. Obviously, this is a pink and white shoe. But a vast majority of people see it differently. And so we say, how could you possibly? Now, we use this phrase a lot, and we have different variations of it. How could you possibly hear it that way? Or how could you possibly not know that, right? How could you possibly think that was okay? Now, the subtext of these phrases, how could you possibly? The subtext is you're an idiot. You're an idiot. Now, here's the thing. We don't usually say this phrase. We don't call people idiots to their faces, but we say, how could you possibly? We think it all the time. And we think it because we perceive things differently. Now, to all of my pink and white friends, all of us there on the pink and white team, pink and white, the shoe is actually pink and white. The shoe is actually pink and white. Now, we'll come back to this in just a minute, but I want to give a little validation to my friends in pink and white. Now, if you perceive this as gray and teal and you're feeling something inside right now, we'll talk about that in a minute. But before we do, I want to go a little bit deeper with our questions. And I want to talk about this next one here called systemic racism. I really want to understand how we deal with this phrase. Now, I'm going to throw the caution tape here because it's another one of those phrases that can really fundamentally change the way a conversation goes. Now, I want you to practice saying, I don't know, if you actually don't know. Because remember, the only things in life we can learn are things that we don't yet know. And when you open up and say, I don't know, you're opening up yourself to a position of the learner. And that's actually a position of humility. And humility and humanity go hand in hand. So if you care to, go ahead and enter into the poll. How do you define systemic racism? I'm going to go ahead and be quiet for a few seconds to let people start typing those in. And again, if you don't know, feel free to type in, I don't know, but go ahead and let me know, how do you define systemic racism? And I want to commend the first few people typed in there, I don't know. And so again, I love that you put yourself in the position of the learner. And so just kind of listen to some of the other responses as they come through. I'm not going to be able to read all of them because I want to make sure we keep going. But there's a lot of responses, and I do want to start reading through them here. Someone said, I don't know. People said systems that benefit the majority only. Another couple, I don't knows. I think I know, I'm not 100% sure. Widespread and institutionalized. Racism that is a systemic bias by the main group of people. Racism built into societal systems. Let's see, things that are just built into the way things have traditionally been done. Racism that's passed down and might not be as obvious as other forms. Through institutions and government over time. Laws, regulations, and other barriers designed to keep racial groups at a disadvantage. Another, I don't know. I think it relates to the ways that systems have denied services and opportunities to individuals based on something connected to skin color and ethnicity. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of responses here. I'm not going to be able to read them all. If I didn't read yours, I apologize, but keep responding here. I think it's really important that we understand this phrase because it's going to keep coming up, and I think it's important that we continue to discuss it. But the first and foremost we want to do is we want to understand what is a system, right? I think if you think about systemic racism, we first need to identify what is a system. And a system is defined as a set of things, principles or procedures that work together to produce some outcome. So there are many, many, many systems that you interact with on a daily basis. Your body is a system, actually a system of systems, right? So you have your endocrine system, you have your cardiovascular system, or you have all these different systems. Our vehicles, our cars are systems. Now, and so when you think about, you have some inputs that you put in, I'm definitely going to overgeneralize this, but you put fuel into the fuel tank, you put a key into the ignition, and you have oil in the engine, and you turn the key and the car turns on. Right, so the system works as expected. You put the inputs in and you turn it, right? That's an input and you get the results you're looking for, right? That's the outcome or outputs of the system. Now, what happens? You have fuel in the fuel tank, you key in the ignition, oil in the engine, you turn it and it doesn't turn on. You've identified that you might be experiencing systemic dysfunction. Right, now, systemic dysfunction is when the data or the outcomes of a system do not equal what you would expect given the inputs. And when there is systemic dysfunction and you've normalized for all other variables, except the only one that's different is race, you're dealing with systemic racism. If the only variable you're dealing with is age, then you're dealing with systemic ageism, or right, all these different kinds of isms. And so when you think about systemic racism, it doesn't mean that everyone in the system is racist, right? But it does mean that because of race, we are getting different outcomes that you wouldn't expect given the incomes and inputs. And so when you do that, you can slowly start to diagnose what's going on. Some examples of systemic racism in healthcare, right? There's this idea, the stereotype that has lived since the days of slavery. This idea that the African species, because they're actually identified as a different species back then, right? The African species don't feel pain. And that was actually used to justify the poor physical treatment of enslaved people. And when you think about this idea, first of all, why would you use pain and torture to keep people in line if they can't feel pain? That makes no sense, right? That's a story for a different day. But think about this. That idea, that stereotype has persisted through today. Many people in this country still believe that Black people feel less pain. In fact, the American Medical Journal of Ethics a few years ago just did a study. This is like by doctors, about doctors, for doctors, about pain and race. Everything else held constant. They found that doctors are more likely not to prescribe pain medication to Black patients than white patients. And so I guess the first idea is, well, I guess maybe there's data that shows that Black patients are more likely to abuse pain medication or overdose on pain medication. Actually, the opposite. They're actually less likely to. Actually, they dug in, they found that veterans who came home from war with osteoarthritis were more likely to be delayed in prescription of pain medication if they were Black than if they were white. And when they were prescribed, they were more likely to be prescribed a smaller dose of pain medication. Children who had tonsillectomies or adenoidectomies were more likely not prescribed pain medications if they were Black than if they're white, and more likely delayed in the prescription. People in hospice care found that their pain needs were met less frequently if they were Black than if they're white. Now, again, resist the temptation to start thinking about acute racism. So one thing, I'm a doctor, I'm saying because you're Black, you don't get this. Right, no, zoom out. Think of the systems level. Let the data do the talking. Zooming out. I don't think that everyone doctor's like, oh, because you're Black, you get less. No, but if you zoom out and look at the data, you can identify that there might be systemic dysfunction. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about systemic racism. Now, if you are resistant to the idea that there is some systemic dysfunction, then that is something that might be considered a racist idea, right? Here's what I mean by that. Any idea that persists and allows for racism to continue, systemic, or acute. That is a racist idea. All right, I want to continue to monitor for those. Now, again, to be clear, it doesn't mean that you're a racist. We're going to come back to that as well. Now, we're talking about perception and reality, right? So we know that perception over time creates this thing called the mental model. Now, our mental model is an internal shortcut, internal representation between the relationship between a set of elements. So I'm going to use this image here to represent your mental model, right? And so when you look at this, you see a bunch of interconnected, intertwined circles here, right? And so when you look at this, these intertwined circles here, it's different than what you saw before, right? And so sometimes we get new information that challenges our mental model, right? And this challenge to our mental model is that these are in fact concentric circles, as you saw before. Now, our mental model says these are intertwined circles, but the information that you know, the logic says they're not. And so we're experiencing cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance is an unpleasant psychological state resulting from a clash between disharmonious elements. For example, our mental model and newly presented information. Right? Now, when we experience cognitive dissonance, it results in this heightened attention and arousal. One of the strongest drives in all of humanity is to restore psychological harmony or reduce dissonance. And so some of the things that we do when our mental model is challenged, we'll minimize the importance of the new information. We will totally ignore the new information. We will try to delegitimize the new information. Sometimes we will try to overemphasize the original information. And sometimes we'll practice self-affirmation. Now, this one doesn't seem to fit in here, but it does. Because sometimes the mental model that is being challenged is the mental model that I am a good person. Right? Remember before when I asked people what is bias? Well, bias is bad and I'm a good person. Right? Sometimes the mental model is that I'm a good person. Sometimes I'm intelligent. Sometimes I am thoughtful. Sometimes all these mental models that we hold of ourselves, if those are challenged to restore psychological harmony, what we try to do is restore self. Right? And practice self-affirmation. You hear people say, yeah, but I have Black friends. I have Black family. I have this. I have that. I have a friend. I have a spouse. Because the mental model is being challenged that they're a good person. And they want to prove to you that they are, in fact, a good person. Now, the last thing we can do is we can allow both elements to exist. So instead of, I know these are crisscrossing circles, and Eric says that they are concentric circles, we can allow both elements to exist by saying, I perceive these to be crisscrossing circles, and Eric says that they are concentric circles. And when we allow both elements to exist, we can consider it differently. So instead of holding tight to this illusion of certainty that I know the way in which I perceive the world is the way the world actually is, my worldview is truth, we're going to hold open the possibility that there might be something outside of our view. Now, we talked about racism, acute racism. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about racist. A racist is a person who is prejudiced against all these things, right? So a racist is a person who does these things. Now, the interesting idea here that I really want to challenge is this concept of racist or anti-racist, right? So if you think about this as a continuum, right? So we are all, the continuum goes in either direction forever, right? And so you are always on some point in the continuum. You can go one way or the other, right? The problem with this idea is that to say that you are one or the other, you need to slap a label on yourself and say, hello, I'm a racist. And this idea of a character trait, I am a racist. Well, the problem is when you have challenging feedback, you are going to receive that feedback on one of two levels. The outer level is what I do, and the inner level is who I am. And when you think about this, what I do, or my behaviors, are relatively easy. I mean, they're not easy, but they're relatively easy to change. Who I am, my character, is relatively difficult to change. So when you say, are you racist? Are you a racist? We're actually trying to tell people that they have a character flaw, that they are undoubtedly, with every thought, every being, they are prejudiced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? And so I want you to remove this concept of a racist as a character trait and get something a little bit more actionable. Let's talk about racist behaviors or racist ideas or anti-racist behaviors or anti-racist ideas. Now, the interesting thing as you start to think about this is we know that there are things that we can do to slide one way or the other, right? Because we're talking about behaviors. We're talking about signing our name with our non-dominant hand. We're talking about becoming aware of our biases. There's things that we can do, our behaviors. Now, we talk about this idea of racist ideas. And I want to just talk about this. What racist idea is any idea that suggests, and this actually comes from Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist in the book Stamped from the Beginning, and a remix with Jason Reynolds called Stamped, a book that I really recommend reading. It's a fantastic book. A racist idea is any idea that suggests that one racial group is inferior or superior to another racial group in any way. Racist ideas argue that the inferiorities and superiorities of racial groups explain racial inequities in society. Now, we have these ideas. One of the clearest racist ideas is that Black people or any other, if you think about through history, this idea of the savage new person. The African people were savage. The people who were in this country before the Europeans came over, they were labeled as savages. People in South America were labeled as savages, right? People, the Mongolians were labeled as savages. You see this idea of savage, the other, or savages. That's a racist idea, right? Now, I want to ask you, this is going to be one of the toughest questions we ask here. I want to ask you, what racist ideas or behaviors have you held or do you continue to hold? Now, I want you to remember, your mental model that you are a good person is not being challenged. You are here in this session because you are a good person. I am not suggesting you're not. And I'm not suggesting that you are a racist. You are not a racist. Because I guarantee you have thoughts that are not racist thoughts. You have ideas that are not racist ideas, right? But all of us have had racist behaviors. All of us have had racist ideas, right? Many of us may continue to do so. And so what I want to do is I want you to think about this one for about 30 seconds, and then I'll open up the poll. I'm not going to open up yet because I want you to think about it first. All right? All right. Go ahead and start typing those in. What racist ideas or behaviors have you had or do you continue to hold? Again, this is a challenging question, right? But again, not challenging who you are. There was a movie that came out in the early 2000s called Rush Hour with Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan. I loved that movie. I laughed at that movie. I watch it back now and it is full of racist humor. Chock full, like just about every scene has racist humor. And I laughed at it. Laughing at those jokes are racist behaviors and racist ideas, right? And so acknowledging those behaviors and those ideas doesn't make me a racist, but it makes me aware. And from this place of awareness, I can start to choose different behaviors. Again, I'm not going to be able to read through all of them, but if you're thinking, keep thinking. If you are typing, keep typing. I do want you to do this exercise. I want you to think through this. Think about this. Many people will say things like, I feel less safe when I drive through certain neighborhoods. I had someone share with me before, when I drive to work, I drive past a high school and I will drive past a group of white children and I will assume that they're going to school. And a block and a half later, I'll drive past a group of Black children and I will assume that they're up to no good. In reality, they're probably going to the same school as the previous group, but I have this idea that they're up to no good, right? becoming aware of these ideas and these behaviors and these thoughts really help us understand. People have said before that they will only date certain people of certain races, right? Because they believe something. Now I'm going to read through some of these. I'm not going to be able to read through all of them. And also, it may be hard to hear some of these. But again, these are maybe past ideas or behaviors, maybe present. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading through them. Black people are stronger than white people, physically stronger, judging people based on their look, not recognizing racist comments or intentions, looking around my surroundings when I see a black man walking close to me, using caution around people who look different than me. Other ethnic groups are more intelligent and successful than mine. Stop having children if you cannot afford them. Black, Indigenous, and people of color have harder upbringings than I did, etc. And so when you start to think about these ideas, and again, there's more, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to read all of them. I want you to just think about this. Answering this question over and over and over is going to be the first step into thinking about things in an anti-racist way, right? And that's what we can do together, is we can start to change the fact that the screen kept showing me that the green die is going to show up a 6. The green die is going to continue to show up a 6. So we start to expect that green die is going to be a 6, right? What if society tells us that black men are savage, black men are criminal, thugs, angry, athletic? What happens if the screens that we see, the societal impact that we see, keep showing us the same images over and over again? Now, when you start to acknowledge and start to see that you're exhibiting or experiencing some racist behavior or some racist idea, I want you to just say, I'm sorry. Right? If someone brings it up to you, just say, I'm sorry. Don't get defensive, because it doesn't mean that you're a racist. It means that idea, that behavior was. And it's okay, because we can change our behaviors. We can choose to sign our name with our non-dominant hand. Now, the interesting thing is that these ideas of perceptions guide all of our behaviors. And so we start to understand that there are other perceptions outside what we see. We can change our behaviors intentionally. Because perception doesn't equal reality. Perception is more important than reality. And what that means is that what you say or do matters less than what they hear or feel. What you say or do, that's reality. What they hear or feel, that's their perception. And they are going to base their behaviors on their perceptions. And so it's important for us to understand, right, that when we experience people being offended, intent is not required for offensive behavior. You don't need to intend to harm somebody to actually cause harm. All right. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about here, one of the last things here, is this next big one, right? This one is called white privilege. How do you feel when you hear the phrase white privilege? Now, I want to throw the caution tape back up again. This is one of those phrases that can fundamentally change the way in which a conversation can go. How do you feel when you hear the phrase white privilege? Go ahead and type in your responses there into the poll. And don't be embarrassed to be candid, right? You're anonymous here. And I assure you, I've seen every response that you could possibly come up with. I've seen them all. So feel free to let me know. How do you feel when you hear the phrase white privilege? All right. If you're thinking, keep thinking. If you're typing, keep typing. I want to read through some of these. I feel angry. I feel it's true. I feel unfair. I feel surrounded by it. I feel it depends on who's saying it. I feel mostly guilty because I know it exists and I benefited from it. I feel guilt. I feel it's a very real thing. I feel angry. I feel it doesn't exist. I feel like it's produced by the media. Right? Now, one thing I think is very, very important for us to understand, us in this dialogue, is that in this context, privilege may not mean what you think it means. I think, unfortunately, the phrase white privilege is sonically similar to the phrase a life of privilege, which means born with a silver spoon in your mouth, never had to work hard for anything that you've gotten in your life, right? You haven't had any struggles, right? That's not what privilege means. In this context, privilege doesn't mean that you haven't struggled. It doesn't mean you haven't worked hard to earn what you have earned. It doesn't explain the kind of person you are. Having white privilege does not mean you're a racist. And white privilege isn't the only kind of privilege. Privilege just means that a member of a group may not have to worry about something that a member of another group may have to worry about, right? It's all about worry. Now, here's the thing. I'm a parent. I have 3 children. And my job as a parent is to make sure that my children have less worry than I did growing up. Right? Think about this kind of idea of the analogy of walking down a street and then stepping into a pothole and spraining your ankle, and then having to continue walking with a sprained ankle. But then you turn around to the person behind you and say, whoa, watch out for that pothole, and they step over it. Now they don't have to worry about walking with a sprained ankle. Right? You've given them privilege, one less worry. That's privilege. Privilege is not bad. In fact, the entire goal of parenting is privilege. The American dream about one generation doing better than the previous generation is all about privilege. Privilege is not bad. And again, white privilege is not the only kind of privilege. And to help really understand this, I want to talk about one of my favorite kinds of privilege, and this is handedness privilege. All right. Now, I want to ask you this. Right hand privilege, what might be some things that a left-handed person may have to worry about that a righty may not have to worry about? Let's talk about some worries, right? So what are some things that left-handed people might have to worry about that right-handed people may not have to worry about? Go and enter that one in the poll. And if you're struggling with this, that is privilege. Privilege is not bad, right? It just means that you haven't had to worry about it. And I love this when I do this. I get usually a long list of things from my left-handed people because they have, I've been thinking about this a lot. And this is what happens. We think about our own privileges, right? It's easy for us to see our own privileges, hard for us to see privileges, right? That other people may struggle with, that other people don't have, right? Now, I've been doing this for a long time. I actually spend a lot of time talking with left-handed people, and they say buying golf clubs. Here's some response here. Buying baseball mitts, right? Writing on a notebook. I see because perfect. I love it. Writing a notebook. So a right-handed person, your hand rests on the paper in front of the ink going down, right? Because in English we write left to right, and so your ink trails your hand. When you're left-handed, your hand trails the ink, right? It's pretty crazy, right? Right-handed privilege, right? And so when you start to think about this idea of what does this mean when people are engaging in a life that you haven't had to worry about, right? It's really interesting. Like, it's not about good or bad, right? It's just privilege is a lack of worry. Other privileges may exist. How about American privilege? What might someone from, say, Haiti have to worry about that an American may not have to? Maybe hurricanes all the time. Maybe clean drinking water. I love this idea of clean drinking water. Have you ever worried about clean drinking water at home? Probably not. You probably live in a municipality that cleans the water for you, or you have reliable access to clean drinking water. In fact, most of us have so much clean drinking water that we wash our vehicles and our pets in clean drinking water. All right? That's a privilege. Privilege is not bad. But what it does, it allows us the opportunity to start thinking about what things other people may worry about if they don't have our privilege. Right? Now, the interesting thing is that there's research that shows that a vast majority of our worries never materialize. There's some research that says between 50 and 85% of the things that we worry about never materialize. So let me ask you a question. If we're talking about bias and brain efficiency, why on earth would we ever waste our time worrying about something that we've never worried about? Let's say we worried about 100 things, and of those 100, only 15 actually show up. Why would we spend any time worrying about extra things? We wouldn't. That would make no sense. And that's why it's so difficult for us to acknowledge our privileges, is because we're talking about things that we have not worried about that someone else might be worried about. It's difficult. It's difficult, right? But when we start talking about things that maybe we have worried about, like wealth, what might someone in a wealthy family not have to worry about that we have to worry about? It's a lot easier for us to think about. Here's things that I've worried about. That's the idea of privilege. So when we come back to this idea of race or white privilege, right? It's not saying that you are bad because you are white. It's not saying that you are judged poorly because you're white, but rather there might be things you don't have to worry about that someone who is in a different group or may not identify with that group may have to worry about. Right? Again, privilege is not bad. And so instead of getting to a place of anger or shame or guilt that stifles our intentional behaviors, we could use this idea of privilege to lead us into empathy. And empathy is a really, really powerful place because the only things in life we can learn are things that we don't yet know. All right. Okay. So this idea of understanding our biases. We're going to do one last thing before we wrap up here. I want to talk about this concept of the validation of truth. And so if you've had this experience, right, think about the last car you bought, right? Probably when you buy that car, if it was the first time you bought that car, maybe you bought a Subaru, you've had like 10 Subarus in a row. But think about when you bought that car, you drive it off the lot, and what do you see on the road everywhere? That same car, right? Everyone's had that experience, right? Because that is something called the validation of truth, right? We're often looking to confirm that which we already believe. In psychology, we call this confirmation bias. Now, one time I asked at a conference, I asked this woman, what kind of car do you drive? Just pick someone out of the audience. And she says, I drive a Hyundai Veloster. And I'm like, what the heck you drive a Velociraptor? Crazy. No. Anyway. No, it worked. And she said, yes, I drive a Hyundai Veloster, and yes, I see them everywhere. And it was crazy. And I'm like, whew, thank goodness that works. I've never heard of this car before. But being a good geek that I am, I went back to my hotel room after that, and I looked up this car. And I've never heard of it before. And this is the image that came up. A Hyundai Veloster is a funky little 3-door car. Yes, I said 3 doors. If you notice, there's a door here. There's a door handle right there. There's a door, 2 doors. But on the driver's side, there's only 1 door. I don't know why, because it's a Veloster, right? Now, I had to drive home 2 hours after that conference. And guess what I drove behind almost the entire time? A Hyundai Veloster, right? And the thing is, since that moment, since I looked it up and I became aware of it, I started seeing Velosters everywhere. And I started pointing them out everywhere, every time I'd see them. My wife was like, geez, shut up with the Veloster. I'm like, no, the world needs to know. And so I started taking pictures whenever I could safely of the Velosters. And this is about 2 weeks worth of Velosters that I saw. They're everywhere. Now, I have now said Hyundai Veloster about 18 times, right? And I've showed you my entire collection of Hyundai Velosters. This week, you will see a Hyundai Veloster. And when you do, I want you to say, Eric was right. No, I'm just kidding. No. I want you to say there's still more left for me to learn. I want you to think about the patterns that you've created. The racist ideas that you may have had, or may have, or the racist behaviors that you've exhibited. Are we looking to confirm those ideas that we are right? Confirm with that illusion of certainty, I know, and look at the evidence that I've seen? Or are we going to open up to the possibility that the data might be showing us something different? Right? Instead of saying, like, I don't know why you would do that. Or I don't understand why you would do it that way. I don't understand why people do this. I don't understand why they're doing that. You can fundamentally change this from a judgment statement, you're an idiot, to a curious statement by appending 4 little words, but I want to. Now, I know I kind of teach kind of like drinking from a fire hose. I give you a lot of information, very short period of time. Sorry, not sorry. But I don't need you to be an expert in all of this. I just want you to be aware of all of this. And awareness is a very, very powerful thing. This will be the last exercise that we do, right? And I want you to think about how you can become aware of things in your world. Now, to help illustrate this, in this image, there is something to be seen. I want you to look, I want you to find it, because when you find it, something will happen, something will transform in you. Now, when you see it, it'll be perfectly clear, totally unambiguous. Something that does not belong there, and it's not like a magic eye poster, you're going to cross your eyes and see a smiley face in the rock or a pebble or something. The thing you're looking for, I'm going to give you a couple of hints. The thing you're looking for is a cigar. Look for a cigar, all right? The next hint I'm going to give you is I'm going to drain all the color out of the image and just leave the brown cigar in the middle. Does that help anybody? Excellent. If you still can't see it, but you're too embarrassed to ask, there's the cigar. It's right there. All right, now, I'm about to put the image back the way it was before when you couldn't see it. And the crazy thing about awareness is that once you see it, you can never not see it. So you're going to go about your day, you're going to go about your life, and you're going to see the illusion of certainty. You're going to see racist ideas. You're going to see judgment. You're going to see, how could you possibly? You're going to see perception is more important than reality. You're going to see discrimination. You're going to see all of these things. And when you do, I want you to remember that there is more left for me to learn. All right? So, armed with all of this, I want you to believe that there is goodness in the people of the world. And so now, with all of this awareness, you can go and you can be the good. Thank you very much. And thanks for coming to my TED Talk.